Are you a podcaster? Maybe you've got that big idea and you're looking for a network to join. The multi-award-winning Ozcast network can get your content to eyes and ears all over the world. Join now for the first month free, and you could be featuring this sound at the beginning of your podcast. Ozcast. Simply head to ozcastnetwork.com for details.
Wavelength.
Mental illness doesn't have to be a life sentence.
Alcohol addiction, abuse, misuse is the same all over the globe.
Sparking the combos about Adelaide.
So it made me feel very confident that if we did have it in the state, we were going to know about it.
You should be having.
There'll be guys that are trained, but they don't feel like they're good enough to take their shirt off.
Almost everyone is a culprit of doom scrolling. Anyone who has a mobile phone.
On Fresh 92.7.
Welcome to Wavelength, sparking the convos about Adelaide you should be having. I'm your host, David, and tonight I am joined by Jamie. How are you doing? Would you be able to give the show a bit of a quick introduction?
Hey, David, and hello, everybody. Happy Monday, Arvo. It's been a great weekend. I'm feeling good about the day. I hope everyone's had a good day as well and had a fun weekend. I'm really excited about this week's segment, actually. We've got some really interesting stories. So let's get into it. Tonight on Wavelength, we're asking whether a vacancy tax should be the solution to SA's homelessness problem. In SA, there's thousands of deemed to be homeless and more than 1,000 empty properties in the CBD alone. So why not encourage those houses to be put in use?
Wavelength is also going to explain why one of last year's most critically acclaimed video games has been banned in Australia. But next, we're doing a deep dive into a life-saving sexual assault service called Yarrow House. You're listening to Fresh.
Wavelength.
Welcome back to Wavelength, sparking the convos about Adelaide you should be having. So this next story does contain some content that could be hard to hear for some listeners, but it's a chat we need to have, especially in light of the many stories of sexual assault in Canberra in recent weeks.
Yeah, that's right. This next story about sexual assault service Yarrow House is really permanent. The space itself is the space for anyone who's been sexually assaulted to be looked after and given a safe space to recover. This week, I spoke with Katrina Dee, the director of Yarrow House, to learn more about the centre.
Wavelength on Fresh 92.7.
Since Brittany Higgins came forward and spoke about her alleged assault, a number of women have come forward to tell their stories about sexual harassment and assault. It's also important to remember that there are countless people who have been victims of sexual violence who have had to watch and listen to the constant reporting. We here at Fresh thought that it was important to let survivors out there know that help is available. I spoke with Katrina Dee, Director of Youth and Women's Safety and Wellbeing Division of the Women's and Children's Health Network, about a help service she oversees, Yarrow Place.
Yarrow Place is a rape and sexual assault service. They provide healthcare responses to people 16 years and over who've experienced a sexual assault. They are inclusive, so they will see women, men, transgender, non-binary, anyone who identifies that they've been sexually assaulted and needs support. They're 24 hours for a recent sexual assault, and by recent we mean if it's within the last 72 hours up to a week, and then if it's a sexual assault that's occurred beyond that time frame, we would generally attend to that within business hours. And in terms of services, they provide a duty line, so you can call through and speak to a professional social worker who will do an assessment around what you might need and what's happened with the person. They provide counselling ongoing, which is really trauma specialist and helps people to unpack the impact of the trauma. And they also provide healthcare responses, so ensuring that any injuries or impact on their physical health is attended to. And we also provide a forensic service, so that for people who want to report to police and would like the police to investigate and potentially seeking a criminal justice pathway, we have forensic consultants who collect evidence that supports the criminal justice process.
Now, I also understand that there is a therapeutic program for young people who are aged 12 to 25. Can you tell me a little bit about that?
Yeah, so we have actually two programs. Now, they're for young people who are under guardianship of the CE or of the Department of Child Protection. So they are young people who are either being sexually exploited or at risk of being sexually exploited and are running away from care. So these are young people whose lives are really disrupted and they're needing support to stabilise and reduce sexual exploitation. So we work very intensely with them, and they're referred into the program by the Department of Child Protection. The other group is called the My Place program. That's for young people who are at risk of pregnancy or are pregnant, and where there's a risk that the child may be removed or the baby may be removed by the Department of Child Protection. Again, very young, vulnerable people who may very well have been sexually exploited or in domestic violence situations, and we work very intensely with them as well to help support them around that trauma.
When someone comes and tells you about their sexual assault experience, what's the best way to approach that conversation?
One of the most important things to do is respond well, because most people, they disclose for the first time to a family member or a friend, and that response will really influence how well they do in terms of talking to other people about it. So if you, as a family or friend, respond well, that's going to encourage the person to talk. What you need to do, it's simple. Just believe what they're telling you. You don't have to make a decision about whether what they're saying is truthful or not truthful. We're not a jury, we're not the police. We're just people who are friends or family. We're just listening. And so believing should be a really simple starting point. The second thing is don't blame the person. It's so tempting sometimes to say, why did you do that? Why did you go with him? Why did you trust him? Why didn't you tell somebody earlier? Stop with why questions. Stop anything that sounds even subtly like blame. Just let the person talk. And it might be that you acknowledge gratitude that they spoke to you. Thank you for telling me about that. That must have been really difficult.
Just on that, those blaming sort of questions, what if they direct it at themselves? They've said, but I was so drunk, I shouldn't have been that intoxicated. And I find it really difficult knowing how to sort of dissuade them from that sort of negative thinking.
Just again saying to the person, look, it's really important not to blame yourself.
Wavelength, sparking the convos about Adelaide you should be having on Fresh 92.7.
That was Aj chatting with the director of Yarrow House, Katrina Dee. What did you think about that one, Jamie?
Yarrow Place is a really amazing organisation. I think that in terms of all of the things that are coming out at the moment in terms of female sexual assault and female empowerment, it's a really amazing organisation to get across and be aware of. If anyone in Adelaide or anywhere else is in need of any of these services, or you think that you can talk to anyone, please reach out. It's an amazing organisation. And I think that as females and males together should be actively working towards creating a safe environment and a safe space for people of sexual assault and females in general. Get around it. It's amazing.
And for those of you who have been affected by sexual violence, know that there is help out there. You can call 1-800-RESPECT or access the services from Yarrow Place. Katrina also wanted to stress that survivors of sexual assault can recover from their trauma and that your trauma does not have to define you. Anyway, coming up after the break, we'll be cracking into our main story of the evening about the idea of a vacancy tax as a solution for Adelaide's homeless problem. But right now, you're listening to Wavelength on Fresh 92.7.
Wavelength on Fresh 92.7.
We have had decades of underinvestment and declining levels of social and public housing in Australia.
No, unfortunately, I don't see this issue being solved in the near future. Being very transparent about what our plans are.
If you've stepped foot in the Adelaide CBD, it's likely you've seen a rough sleeper in front of buildings or tucked away in a secluded corner. A report by Shelter SA estimates there are roughly hundreds of vacant dwellings unoccupied in the city and are looking into ways to utilise them, including a vacancy tax so landlords don't leave those homes empty. To see whether it's possible to provide shelter to those struggling, I talked to Shelter SA's CEO Alice Clark and the Australian Alliance to End Homelessness CEO David Pearson.
Yeah, look, I think it's definitely an idea that's worth exploring. It's really important that we understand better why there are so many properties out there that are vacant, but the one thing that we know about homelessness is that we need more investment in the types of options that help us end homelessness. We know what it takes to end homelessness, so any options that help us raise revenue, definitely worth looking at. And I think then it's really about making sure that that revenue is reinvested in homelessness services, things that we need to drive innovation in the way we support people who are homeless and the way we, develop housing. And of course, really importantly, that it puts an incentive out there to make sure that housing that isn't being used is actually used.
So it was a topic that we were very interested in, and partly because we don't have enough social housing to meet the needs of people who need a home. So when we looked at vacancy taxes, we found that there's mixed reviews about them, where they are applied in other countries and in Australia.
Is the new $550 million housing and homeless strategy trying to assist that lack of social housing at all?
Look, there's no predicted increase in the supply of social housing. That $550 million is predominantly going to be spent on building what we call affordable housing. So that will help some people, there's no doubt, but the price point of affordable homes is up to $420,000. So I don't know about you, but I don't know anybody living on a low income that would be able to achieve a mortgage of that size without a considerable deposit, and the repayments would leave them pretty much with nothing every week. So I can't see how that plan to build affordable housing is going to assist people experiencing homelessness.
Why do you think there is a reluctance to kind of invest in these types of strategies?
Yeah, well, I think it's priorities, and I think it's the way we budget, to be honest. We budget in such short-term cycles, which is caused by short-term political imperatives. It costs more to leave a person on the street than it does to house them sustainably. You have to capture those costs over a longer period of time, and you have to capture those costs across government departments, and we don't budget well enough for that. So, one thing I think would be great to see is the sort of wellbeing budgets you've seen in places like New Zealand, where they take into account the social costs and they take into account the long-term costs of failing to provide the housing and support that are needed to people who are homeless, and then recognise that actually it's an investment, not a cost, and the investment pays off. When you include people in society, they're able to function better. There's not much of a drain on the health system, and then actually they're able to thrive as human beings, which means they can contribute to society, engage in the labour market and support a growing economy and be part of community.
What does the future look like for those struggling in SA?
Even if South Australia did announce an investment in social housing to increase the net supply of properties, if that happened today, they wouldn't be on the ground for some time. We can't just build the thousands of homes that we need overnight. So that's another reason why we've put forward this idea of rental vouchers and encouraging governments to look more into all the vacant residential properties. And there's also a lot of international student accommodation that's sitting idle at the moment. So we think if we're serious about ending homelessness, we should be looking at every option available and how we can activate the structures that we've already got while we think about and act on investing in social housing.
That was Miller speaking with Shelter SA CEO Alice Clark and the CEO of Australian Alliance to End Homelessness, David Pearson. What did you think about that, Jamie?
Homelessness in SA is a huge issue, and I think there's some really amazing light that's been shed here on this issue. I think that talking with Shelter SA and Alice Clark in particular has put some really interesting points into perspective about what it takes to fix this homelessness situation, where, in my opinion, if we have homeless people on the streets, that's a reflection on a failing of our government. I think there are so many things we can do, and they've really pointed out some really interesting things that we can do. And I think that it's really important to keep aware of this issue in terms of homelessness and just to be human about it. And when you see people on the street that are homeless, don't turn a blind eye, say hello, be human, offer them a bottle of water, offer them food, but then also realize there are so many more things we can be doing in terms of funding organisations that align with these issues and want to do better for the community collectively. But it's something that we all need to be aware of and keep looking out for and keep pushing forward to create a better community for everyone, because at the end of the day, everyone's human and everyone deserves a better future.
Yeah, absolutely. A really important chat to be having. But later on the show, Emil is going to be addressing the other side of the coin from people who are against this proposed vacancy tax. So it's really interesting stuff coming up later in the show. Right now, though, after the break, Hamish will be letting you know what the hell has been going on this week. You're listening to Fresh.
Wavelength.
Welcome back to Wavelength. We'll be getting back into our story about the proposed vacancy tax to potentially a solution to end homelessness. But right now we're cracking into our weekly segment where Hamish explains what the hell has happened this week.
What the hell is going on this week? Wavelength on Fresh 92.7.
This week, our friends in New South Wales were ravaged by Mother Nature's latest reminder that she is thoroughly sick of our shit, as flash floods left parts of Sydney looking like the floors of Red Square at 5 a.m. on a Saturday morning. In a silver lining, though, at least that mouse plague is probably all sorted now, so I guess things evened out. Prime Minister Scott Morrison tried his best this week to confront the growing claims of a toxic workplace within Parliament after Liberal staffers were caught masturbating on female colleagues' desks. I guess when the Liberal Party warned that same-sex marriage would lead to people having relations with inanimate objects, they were talking about themselves. NRL star Jared Haynes' fall from grace came to fruition this week after he was found guilty of sexual assault, facing a potential 14 years in jail. If he does manage to avoid jail time, however, he might just land a spot on ScoMo's reshuffled cabinet. In the media's latest attempts to create division and social unrest, headlines proudly proclaimed this week that people were calling for the name of popular ice cream Golden Gay Time to be changed. And by people, they meant one man who started an online petition that couldn't even garner 500 signatures, and is most likely a psychological operation by a conservative troll to incite frustration towards the gay community. Because as we all know, Golden Gay Times have done plenty for the LGBTQI movement, normalising heterosexual men putting gay things in their mouths for years. And finally, meme of the week goes to the Evergreen, a massive cargo ship that blocked the Suez Canal, one of the biggest trade routes in the world. It was all fun and games until people started to realise that a massive global economy covering almost 8 billion participants could all possibly come undone by one sideways boat. It's reported the driver's dad is on the way to back it out for him though, and not to worry, this happened once in his VE Commodore when he first got his P-plates and Barry sorted it right out. And that's what the hell's been going on this week.
Wavelength, sparking the convos about Adelaide you should be having on Fresh 92.7.
Thanks for that, Hamish. We've got some more music for you guys right now, though. You're listening to Fresh 92.7.
Wavelength.
Welcome back to Wavelength with David and Jamie tonight. Before the break, we heard from Amila, who spoke with two proponents of a vacancy tax.
But a tax is a tax, and not everyone is on board with it. So right now we're going to hear from the other side of the story, with Amila speaking with the SA Minister for Human Services, Michelle Lensink.
Wavelength on Fresh 92.7.
The government has introduced a $550 million housing strategy that is planned to last 10 years. One of the 5 key strategies is to try and prevent and reduce homelessness. To understand what's available for the homeless and how the plan aims to fix things, I talked to Human Services Minister Michelle Lensink.
So we've got a range of programs that operate all the time. So there's an assertive outreach service that operates around the CBD, which people can actually let the service know if they come across someone who might be sleeping in the doorway of their office, or we might come across people in the parkland, called Street Connect, and it's a particular website which you can just enter some details and that service will come and make contact with that person pretty quickly. We have a range of services that operate across the state. There's about $70 million that's spent every year on homelessness services, and they are focused on getting people off the street, providing support to them, whether it's social work or a registered nurse or meals program, getting them into some form of accommodation and then helping them get their lives back on track.
There's been concern surrounding vacancies in Adelaide and the number of people that are actually homeless. How would you describe that the private rental assistance program is better than considering something like a vacancy tax or a voucher program to help incentivise landlords?
So the South Australian Government through Housing SA provides the private rental affordability program, provides bonds and up to 2 weeks rent. We've got about 60,000 households who are accessing that at any one time. And particularly for people who are on lower income, there's also additional support through the Commonwealth Government Centrelink for the Commonwealth Rental Assistance Program. And that can provide for a family who've got 3 or 4 children to $185 a fortnight as an ongoing payment. So there is significant support for people in the lower income bracket from both levels of government.
For those who are struggling and they really can't get their foot in the door for the market, will there be any plans to provide support for social housing?
Yeah, so there's about 46,000 properties in the combined community housing and South Australian Housing Authority homes. And so people who enter those homes have their rent capped at a percentage, 25% of their household income. So that provides a safety net for people most in need. And because it's such a large portfolio, it needs a lot of really close management just to make sure that we're always getting people who are in most need. So there's some other changes that are taking place. So for instance, I think most people in the community would be surprised and disagree with the current income and asset limits that we have. That there's somebody who has assets of $500,000 put themselves on the housing register. So we're in the process of adjusting those so that we make sure that the people who are accessing the community and housing trust properties are genuinely those most in need.
Will there be any plans to support organisations that also look into these types of issues, such as Shelter SA?
So we've got a strategy which we introduced in December 2019. That's pretty comprehensive, so it goes across the full spectrum of public housing, community housing, private rental, home ownership, and the community housing providers are a large player in that space. We've got some redevelopment projects. There's one at Oakland just commencing, one at Henley Beach with another community housing provider, and those redevelopments will mean that we've got new stock which is brand new and has a variety of tenures, so that it's not just people in the public or community sector, but there's people who are private homeowners, because the blended model is something that we think will work better into the future. So we've got a strategy which we've been very transparent about, or publicly available information. We're just working through all of those to try and improve the situation for all South Australians.
Wavelength, sparking the convos about Adelaide you should be having on Fresh 92.7.
That was Amila speaking with Michelle Lensink, the South Australian Minister for Human Services. Now, Jamie, you've heard both sides. Are you convinced?
Yeah, that was a great segment. I think that SA Shelter offering landlords initiatives to unlock vast body of vacant dwellings in Adelaide could absolutely significantly reduce homelessness and rental stress for rental providers. I think providing a short-term, medium solution to long-term accommodation could be an alleviator of stress, especially in today's climate. All of these places that are left vacant that no one lives in, and then also kind of reflecting that on our homelessness situation, there needs to be some kind of middle ground in terms of what can be done to alleviate homelessness and also work with people that do have these vacant properties. And I think that there's a really interesting way of looking at this. I think this is a really progressive way of looking at it in terms of future endeavours and future gains for a society in general. So I think it's really important.
Yeah, it's a very touchy topic, but it could potentially be life-saving for so many. The fact is we need to do something about homelessness in SA, and this vacancy tax could have some legs. Anyway, next, Wavelength explains why a new video game has been banned in Australia, but right now you're listening to Fresh.
Wavelength.
Welcome back to Wavelength, sparking the convos about Adelaide you should be having. Right now we've got our weekly segment called Wavelength Explains. This week, Hamish is going to let us know why a game called Disco Elysium has been banned in Australia. Take it away, Hamish.
Wavelength Explains on Fresh 92.7.
Every now and then, a video game comes along that just gets everyone talking. The Last of Us, God of War, The Witcher 3. One of the biggest critical darlings of the last few years, though, is a game called Disco Elysium, an award-winning storytelling RPG that's just been banned in Australia. But why? Well, our classification board explained that the game offends against the standards of morality and decency generally accepted by reasonable adults, which is really subjective and vague. A few days after the news dropped, the board did go into more detail, explicitly outlining that games with illicit drug use related to incentives or rewards will be refused classification, as they always have in the past with games like Fallout 3. And for a game where you can split a gram of coke with a 12-year-old, the writing was always on the wall. The game does involve secret quests and achievements for taking drugs, which was always going to see it struggle to get past censors. There's no indication from the game's developers that they'll challenge the board's decision at this stage, or whether they'll just do what the developers of Hotline Miami did when their game got banned, which was to compel the Australian public to just pirate the damn thing. The strange thing is that video games used to get banned in Australia all the time because we simply didn't have an R18 rating to classify many of them under. That changed in 2011, specifically so that these kinds of mature experiences could reach our shores, but it's still not working. Our government still believes it's okay to tell us what video games we can and can't play as law-abiding, tax-paying adults. The R18 rating would have made it impossible to purchase Disco Elysium in store without an ID, so the board's decision is actually a decision on what they think is morally acceptable entertainment for Australians to consume. And I think we can all see this is wrong. Censorship has no place in a democracy. The moral panic around video games is a relic of the 90s, and that's where it should stay.
Wavelength, sparking the convos about Adelaide you should be having on Fresh 92.7.
That there was Hamish explaining why Australian regulators banned Disco Elysium here in Australia. A very interesting subject. I know we have the R rating for a reason, is my first point. Like, why do we have to keep banning video games which have adult content that adults want to engage with, yet they're just going to be banned like that? In a weird way, it sort of feels like it's stifling on people's freedom of speech. We're not going to ban like a book because it has drug references in it. Anyway, now we're getting right back into the music again, guys. You're listening to Fresh 92.7.
Wavelength.
Welcome back to Wavelength, sparking the convos about Adelaide you should be having.
Right now, we've got our favourite weekly segment called Heaps Good News. This week, Jared has got the goods for us.
I know there's gonna be
Heaps Good News on Wavelength.
Hi everyone, I'm Jared McLaughlin, and here is your weekly dose of Heaps Good News. Native American tribes in the US state of Oklahoma have begun deploying tens of thousands of COVID-19 vaccines to other members in their communities after successfully immunising 30,000 tribal leaders. The Indian Health Service has already distributed and administered over 1.25 million doses, with the majority also given to California and New Mexico. In North Queensland, a women's shed has been set up to give those living in isolated communities the tools to develop new skills and combat loneliness. Since starting in 2015, the Charter Towers Women of the Outback Shed has grown to about 16 members and holds weekly workshops to help build self-confidence, put forward ideas, and formulate lifelong friendships. The group is also getting a second shed, which is expected to be opened at the end of this month. And in another US state, this time Virginia, has outlawed cosmetic testing practices on animals. They are the fourth jurisdiction to ban manufacturers from conducting or contracting for testing in Commonwealth areas, and also prohibiting the profiteering of animal-tested products such as shampoo, eyeliner and lipstick. The new law will go into effect on the 1st of January 2022. That's it for Heaps Good News for another week. Catch you all then.
Wavelength, sparking the convos about Adelaide you should be having on Fresh 92.7.
Anyway, thank you so much for that, Jared. That brings us to the end of the show tonight, though, unfortunately. Thank you guys for listening, Adelaide.
Make sure you're subscribed to the Wavelength podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and anywhere else that you get your podcasts. You can listen right back to our old episodes right now, and you'll be the first person to know when tonight's episode goes up. Thanks for an awesome episode. Have a great week. We'll see you next week.
That's right, and thank you so much for joining me this week, Jamie. It was wonderful to have you in the studio. We'll see you guys in 2 weeks. It's a public holiday next Monday, so no Wavelength. You're listening to Fresh.
Wavelength.
Are you a podcaster? Maybe you've got that big idea and you're looking for a network to join. The multi-award-winning Ozcast network can get your content to eyes and ears all over the world. Join now for the first month free, and you could be featuring this sound at the beginning of your podcast.
Ozcast.
Simply head to ozcastnetwork.com for details.